Thank you for tuning in to Shared Hope International's Invading the Darkness, an anti-sex trafficking podcast. We want to acknowledge that the content we discuss can be emotionally challenging and may evoke strong reactions. The stories we share often involve tough subjects related to suffering caused by sex trafficking, which may be difficult for some listeners to hear. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey, welcome back, everyone. We still have Stephanie here for part 2. Last week, we covered the nervous system and readiness. And then we also talked about the vulnerability and early exploitation, the brain, memory, and blind spots. And we are moving into trauma responsive versus trauma informed. Stephanie, thank you for being here for part 2. Everyone, thank you for watching. Okay, Stephanie, for people working with survivors, how can understanding this help us respond better, especially when someone doesn't have a clear or linear story?
Well, let's start with one of the most important pieces. When I talk to volunteers, when we sat down at the table and listened to some very difficult stories and communication of those that were in direct services, I did this little test, and we'll just do it really fast so that you can understand. If you had a piece of paper, you would just write down, I'm going to say a series of words to you. And the reason why I'm going to do this is I want you to see the actual amount of information that you're processing right here, right now, in a typical conversation and setting where we're not on the spot. But I want you to just listen to the letters. I'm actually going to use letters for this. So once I say the letters, I want you to repeat them out. I want you to say them and just see if you got that. So the first, we're going to start with 5. So the first 5 letters are E, C, N, E, I. That was E, C, N, E, I. That was 5 pieces of information randomly without being tested. After trauma, and even for a very short period of time, it might be 3 of those letters. It might be all 5 mixed up in a different sequence. The reason this is important is because you have a person in a 40-year-old body, a 25-year-old body, a 17-year-old body that is processing 3 pieces of information out of the environment. So how does that feel when you can't do more than that, and you have questions being asked, you have expectations that don't match what we call the neurodevelopmental approach says this is the developmental age. Regardless of what their actual biological age is, this individual may only be able to do chores that you would give a 4-year-old right off the bat. So if you're moving into a program or a job and you're setting that up for them or you're speaking to them, they need to match. If your 12-year-old had a processing delay, and when you say, honey, go upstairs and grab your shoes and your laundry, and oh, by the way, don't forget your keys. I love you. And you turn around and they stand there and says, I love you too. And they didn't remember anything else that was in that list. Would you say they were rebellious? Well, some parents, we find out that they did feel like they just weren't listening or paying attention. But the truth is they really couldn't process all that information. So when we're dealing with the survivor in a brain, you have to give them the grace and match your expectations to what they can actually listen to and what's successful for them. If we're trying to get them a job at a phone center and they absolutely are terrified of people, that's probably not going to work. If you're in a house setting and they've never really been in that type of cleaning, what type of jobs would you give that 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old? Would you teach them how to make the bed? Because what I found is the expectations of the volunteers did not match the developmental level. And that is never going to be successful. If your student was struggling and you consistently gave them college level to their brain, when they really need to start building and processing where they are and build up those processing levels, then you're going to be far more successful, one, in your relationship with them, in them building trust, in them feeling a sense of accomplishment. Perhaps the programs that we're going to work with do not have a lot of expectations for that first year. If they're able to accomplish it, but they're not going to have a lot of blowback if they don't. Secondly, who's going to accompany them to the store, to where there are places? I remember walking someone out of prison into the store to get bread, and they had a nervous system meltdown because of the number of choices, just the number of choices. We walked outside, they sat in the car, we helped them to breathe, and then brought them back into the store, and they were able to accomplish it. It's similar to the PALS program when we work with special needs. You have to be present. Sometimes it's not saying a word, but we need to be present. The psychologists will say they need a steady nervous system in the room when they're speaking to someone who has extreme trauma or is triggering. Someone has to have that centering. Someone has to um, be able to hold them up. Not necessarily, we're not doing narratives, we're not talking, we're just there. The ministry of presence is what we talk about. So that's why many of these volunteers, the frustration level on their part, if it's mismatched, is going to create self-harm in their nervous system. They're not going to understand why they're experiencing secondary trauma. Some of those things can help with that, and that's why it's important.
Wow, this is some really good stuff, and it's like confirmation of what I had to do in my own healing as well. You brought up something really important that I wanted to highlight, and it's something I went through. When you said you've walked people out of prison, you've gone to the store, and there's like this meltdown just trying to choose bread because there's so many options. The first time I got released from prison, I went to the store and there was 4 chocolate milks for $4 or for $5. It was like a sale, right? But there was 5 options and I couldn't pick which 4 chocolate milks I wanted. And in reality, now I know I could have picked just one 4 times, but I couldn't make the decision. It was too hard for me. I ended up leaving the store and crying, and I'm not a crier. And so that's a very like real thing that survivors go through that doesn't get talked about very often. And it should be a simple thing, and it's not for when you're having to rebuild your brain. And then the other thing that I often would do, and I didn't learn this from any particular where, but it was like confirmation. Having that steady person in the room. When I was healing, I call it rewiring my brain, positive. And so I'm in having a meeting and being around a group of men because the majority was men in the room. It did something in me and I would want to shut down, but I needed to be a healthy participant in the room and be able to have my voice be heard because I'm part of a team, right? And the person sitting to the right of me knew what I was doing, positive pathways. And when I would start to hyperventilate, I would hold her hand because it was soft. So I'm touching something and I close my eyes. And I remember one of the guys tried to make a joke of it. And she goes, "You stop it. She's doing positive pathways." And so that was even reconfirming that this was a safe environment that I could grow in. And so I wanted to touch on that and give like, yes, because I think more people need to hear this. Nobody ever helped me make the choices. They just was there. And even when I would say, I don't know what to do, what should I do? They never gave me the answer. They might ask some questions that helped me make my answer, or we just aborted the mission and went and did something else because my healing was more important in their life. And so I think more people just need to hear that. So thank you for bringing that up. That's powerful.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's just so nice to hear that you were able to have that person in your life that was able to just be steady and be present. So what a gem. Wow. Thanks for sharing that.
So there is a lot of talk around trauma-informed care, but you've often spoke about being trauma responsive. What is the difference?
So when you're talking about proactive and reactive, so receiving information about how to be trauma informed is one thing, but putting it in practice, for instance, in a conversation, when you know that the processing is low, let's just use our own husbands, for example, or relationships. Let's just talk about that. When we're in an emotionally heightened state and we want to have a discussion about something that was left out, or let's say that that person walks in and they're already in emotional state, they were cut off in traffic, whatever it is. So we're sitting down and generally we just use the test with those 5 letters. When you're in a heightened emotional state, you can only take in like 7 syllables and then you're bouncing to try and catch up in the conversation. Emotionality is really key. So when we're trauma responsive, we understand that person has a limit on what they can process right now. So what we need to do is careful. Sometimes we teach people to take a yellow pad and practice saying, write down your points and only say one at a time. For instance, my husband has extreme PTSD. He has a number of different things out of the military. So we use a yellow pad still to this day. When I need to speak with him about something emotional, I literally have a yellow pad and I write out the most important thing that I want him to know. So I say one sentence and I wait, let him process that. He might respond, he might just grunt, who knows? But giving him a chance and a break in the processing. When I speak so quickly and so much information, we're not being trauma responsive. We might understand the person has trauma, but number one, we're not managing our own emotionality. And perhaps they did something like they ran or they damaged carpet or all of these are real life examples. They damaged a carpet, they spilled Coke on, and they're not used to putting things away. Just a lot of different things. We still have to be steady. We still have to change our amount of information so they can take it in, so they can process what you said, so they can bring it back out and respond to it. It's not just reading them a paragraph of information. Think about a teenager or a child. They just had a terrible day of school and they walk in. Let's say they didn't do their chores that morning. Is that the best time for you to bring up the 15 things? They are not processing. They're only processing the first sentence. So what we have to do is learn how to communicate differently in a trauma responsive way. Our goal is the success. Our goal is that they can process, they can make that process a response. They're not just saying, yeah, whatever. We want them to be able to not be overloaded. We want them to be able to identify what it is we want them to do, whether it's taking out the garbage or we need to get to an appointment, get your shoes. Just think about an 8, 9-year-old and how we would address that. Trauma responsiveness takes that. We also look at the environment. When I'm speaking to them, do I have a bunch of casino lights running around? Is the wall that I'm talking to them about something very important? Does it have 1,000 colors on it? Is it very busy? Or am I turning them to look at me in a space that doesn't have a lot of background noise? Again, they're already operating on high volume. We need to tone down our volume in the environment, in the sensory arena, and in the language aspect so that it's easy to communicate. It's a little bit different than just knowing I need to be nice to you. I need to, when you're spouting up, I need to, well, those are all very important things. But we have a different level of communication when we're working with survivors and those. trauma.
This is fantastic. I don't know if the viewers and listeners feel this way, but I feel like I'm attending a wonderful lecture right now, a therapy session all wrapped into one. I'm already getting so many takeaways with how to apply this. And you kind of already touched on this a bit in your last response, but I just want to really point out right now to professionals or advocates that are working in the field, if you could give one practical example of how they can shift from that trauma-informed response to a trauma-responsive response, essentially.
Excellent. So just remember that your environment, when you're looking at the background around, when I'm having a session with someone, I want to make sure that the sound, what I'm seeing, and how I'm able to look at are not being interfered with. There's not something going on in the background to interfere with it. There are instances when you have a survivor that will do better with background music. Asking those questions is important. You just want to make sure, especially in the initial intakes or the times that you need to talk about a lot of information or expectations, program protocols, that you are giving them unrestricted access to process what you're bringing. Number two, your communication, very important. So you remember that the amount of pieces that you're about to share with them. Sometimes going into the bathroom before you meet with a survivor, giving yourself a high five and remembering slow down, will help you to realize that they can do very well with short bursts of information. Think of Gimli and Lord of the Rings. Short bursts, short bursts. No endurance racing. That's communication with a survivor. That's actually communication whenever we're emotional. We just have to be very intentional when we're working with someone with trauma. We want to make sure that the third thing you can do also is make sure that their favorite candy, yes, I'm shouting out for all you survivors. If you know things that are going to create comfort, if you know their favorite candy, if you know their favorite coffee, if you know something that can bring positive sensory information into their environment before, or we're going to delve into something that's difficult or even, laborious, intense, lot of information. It really helps to start with putting that before them, making sure you have that in their realm so that they immediately tells their nervous system, this isn't a negative, this is associated with something positive. Many times the therapist will ask them, do you need a drink of water? Or just basically put their needs before our needs. Our needs is to get through this. We have a schedule to keep. But what we're dealing with is a nervous system. If it's calm before we begin, if it's already been given some affirmation, and that's not even words, we're going to proceed a lot further. We're going to get a lot more done today. And they're going to feel a lot different when they walk out the door, which is what.
See, it's that positive pathways. You're retraining your brain. This is safe. This is good. Oh, I love it. Oh my goodness. So you also volunteer at prisons, especially with tribal women. You've said that many have yet to be identified with being trafficked. But what do you see as the greatest need in that space?
We need identification. I'll give you a really graphic example just with the wording, but I remember we started in the prison. They really were dealing with prison rape. And PRIA is a training that if you are a volunteer, it does not matter who you are, what group you're going in, you now have to take the Prison Rape Elimination Act training. And I was watching the videos. It's very intensive. They want everyone to understand the seriousness of someone even talking about that and our responsibility. But what I took from that was there are individuals that they're also watching this. These our inmates are watching to say, this is how serious it is. This is the very first time that they've ever realized they have a right to say no. Going back to the ACEs, okay? If that was part of that childhood experience up to this minute, that's the first time many of them have ever heard an alternative narrative that says you have the right to say no. So taking that into identification, the majority of us who were survivors, I remember going into recovery meetings and the 12 steps and the full 4-step and everything that goes on in that realm, realizing that I was only recalling certain pieces of my story. Now, if that's true with memory and you have an individual that can only show up, pay attention, um, process once in a while. If they're even taking a victimology course, what's really difficult is how much of that is being processed against that childhood narrative of, if I say anything, I'm going to be hurt. If I tell that this is going on, that I'm going to end up beaten or whatever our ACEs, whatever our experiences were. So these particular individuals have never had a narrative that says you should be safe. You have the right to say no. There's just a whole conversation that needs to be taught. Identification needs to be done in prison. And that can be something as simple as reading through, like Rebecca Bender's first book on, there's lots of different stories. The problem though that we have in that space is you have to pick something and you have to be very careful because they're recorded. They can't necessarily share crimes in small groups. They're being heard when they're on the phone. So those relationships, if there is a space where they can hear or watch a video, I think in Montana they're doing a curriculum using a video that talked about how the girls inside were being targeted by people who would look up their crimes. If they had certain things in them, they would immediately start writing them letter and boyfriending them. So by the minute they got to the gate, that trafficker was already there. Within 3 days, they were drugging and they were back in. So the highest level of these individuals, the highest, I think, population of survivors we have are in prison, and they just don't even know it yet. As far as the tribal women, the indigenous women, that what I was listening to was our religious activities coordinator at the prison we were serving at said that they will not leave. There's 90% of them will not leave because once they walk out the door, there are some very dangerous elements in our community here and family. There's a number of issues that are behind that, but there's such a constant pattern of exploitation that has gone on that their safest place is to be in prison. And so they will reoffend just to stay in prison. And if you think about, let's just talk about the sensory wise. If that's been the only place that you've had a level of, I don't want this, or if that is the level that you see as safe, what is going to be necessary in order to train that brain to accept something else? That will be consistent, frequent, intense conversations. That is going to take some work for us to get to that.
Yeah. And so, Stephanie, you just mentioned that statistic, which is mind blowing, right? That 90% of Indigenous women who you encounter in the prison system, they don't want to leave because of fear or reexploitation. Could you give maybe a practical intervention that you would recommend that's needed right away within that population?
Absolutely. So what the discussion, and this has been a piece for years of discussing this, that finally they're going to get grants that give an opportunity for, say, on the tablet of each woman, because they're going to have everyone knowing the number of ACEs. Like I said, almost all of them, 8 out of 10, right off first question, that they are going to put it on a tablet with a video that talks about that story of how vulnerable they are to these boyfriends, to these things. They're going to start the conversation and lead off with questions and answers on the tablet. They don't have to talk to anybody unless they want to. They're going to sprinkle into that conversation, some steps to take. That woman reading that doesn't have to talk about crimes with anyone, but if they want help, the victim services are now ready for them to come. They have actually I think the first girl that is being placed in a different state. They now know they can't just release them. Now that it's been determined that these factors are here, which, hear me, the factors, we have all been taught statistics and factors. If the factors are in bright light, the victim services are now prepared. Their first girl went all the way through where they moved her to a completely different state program for survivors and healing. So we're starting with a conversation at the level of processing. They can go back and rewatch it at their pace. They can answer the questions at their pace. There's no negative. They can take as long as they want. So all of those factors. But once they've done that, something is going to shift. They may not be vocal right away, or they may immediately go, oh my gosh, I need to talk to my case manager. I need to talk to it may start the conversation to where we can bring them into more of the victimology that perhaps they went through the class to check it off. They weren't processing, maybe it was too much information, but now we can bring that into the next conversation, which is, let's find out if you are fitting all these criteria where we can place you and give you some options and help empower you to take those next steps to work in your own healing. We want to make sure that they have that say so that, again, they process what they said and they can look forward to, okay, what's the next step? Not being overwhelmed, but the next step is, and each state is going to have different considerations in that system. So I want to say every state has its own way of doing that. But now, if we can just give them that first step of identification, self-identification, where they're not on the spot, they're not having to perform to give an answer. I believe that once that happens, we're going to start a fire, because once that spark is there, they will continue to look back at that day, at that information. And it might be immediate. It might be 2 to 5 years out. Maybe they're in a relationship right now that's very controlling in prison. But we just gave them something. And their non-conscious is going to be working that tool all the way through to release. So give them the tools, give them that first voice of safety. Even as an adult, you're still talking to the child. You're still giving them the first voice narrative of safety. And once we do that, we can begin that chain reaction, that fire. So very important.
Wow, Stephanie, thank you for sharing your story, your knowledge, and your calling. Man, you've shown us that real healing requires us to see the whole person, the body, brain, and story.
And your message is clear that the nervous system matters, safety matters. And for those who've lived through exploitation, especially those still behind bars, we can't wait to act. We have to start implementing services now.
We need to move forward. We need to move with understanding. We need to move with urgency and with love. Stephanie, thank you for reminding us of that.
You're amazing. It's been my honor. Oh, I'm so excited to see what that spark is going to do. Thank you both so much.
Thank you for listening to Shared Hope International's Invading the Darkness podcast. You can continue to listen and watch our podcast on all streaming platforms. To learn more about what Shared Hope International is doing and take action to end child sex trafficking, please visit us at sharedhope.org.